Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. How are you? We're working our way through Shlomo Katz's Live in Melbourne album. That was, as he said, a very old nigun of Shlomo Carlebach, and that's set to the words Veyeda from the Yom Kippur liturgy. Veyeda kol paul ki ata pe'alto veyavin kol yitzur ki ata yitzarto. Let everything that has been made know that you are its maker. Let everything that has been molded understand that you are its molder. You know, once you plug into the holiness of this world, it becomes unmistakable to you, you know, how magnificent is God's creation. But tragically, so many people are just completely disconnected from that. And so they are creatures that don't know they've been created, nor that they have a relationship with their creator who would love to have an active relationship with them. So we pray, let everything that has been made know it has been made by a maker. Let everything that has been molded know it has been molded by the molder. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Okay, quickly, as I've mentioned the last couple of days, I am going away, flying out tomorrow morning. I'm going to Florida, a couple of days with the family, and then I'll be trying out for Team USA, the Masters golf team, to compete in the Maccabiah Games next summer. But the tryouts are this coming week. The 50-plus division. I would really love to make this team. I represented the USA in the Pan Am Maccabiah Games in 2015, but that really is not nearly as big a deal as the World Games that take place in Israel every 4 years. And if I'm so blessed to make the squad, then I hope to give a talk while I'm there to all the assembled athletes, do a little public speaking, and share how Israel, the Maccabiah Games, the Torah, the Talmud, my films, how everything has been part of a journey. I was a totally secular, disconnected Yid, not disconnected from God. I always had a connection to God, but I was very disconnected from Judaism when I was younger, and I hope that I'm able to share with all those athletes at the Maccabiah Games what a beautiful connection that is with the tradition, one worth investigating, checking out for yourself. But first, I got to make the team. It'll be 3 rounds of stroke play, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I just got to play the best that I can. I hope to make the squad. Okay. I'm also trying to get to a Shiva minyan tonight. Some friends of ours in the community, a woman lost her mom. They're going to have a mourner's minyan at her home, in about less than an hour. So I'd like to get to that. So let's keep it moving. This is a great page. This is a great daf. We are holding at page 28. There's some famous teachings on this page. Here in Tractate Sukkah, the 7th volume of the Talmud, we are in chapter 2. We're completing our discussion of Mishnah number 8. We will open and complete our discussion of Mishnah number 9, and then we'll just mention Mishnah number 10. So let's get to it. In our discussion of Mishnah number 8, we were talking about that Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with the majority or he later in the Gemara it tells us that he came around, but at least initially he disagreed with the majority of the sages on whether or not one has a quota of meals that he must take in the Sukkah during Sukkot. Rabbi Eliezer held he should have 14 meals, one by day, one by night, every day of Sukkot. The sages said, if you eat a meal, meaning if you have a meal that includes bread and you wash before and bench afterward, say the grace afterward, during the festival, the week-long festival of Sukkot, you must have that meal in the Sukkah, but you can skip a meal. You're not obligated to eat 2 meals every day of Sukkot, and if you decide not to eat a meal at all, you would not have violated any commandment according to the majority. Now, at the top of the A side of page 28, we continued learning a little bit about Rabbi Eliezer and his relationship with the other sages. The sages taught there was an incident involving Rabbi Eliezer, who stayed in the Upper Galilee, that's northern Israel, near the Sea of Galilee, and the people there asked him 30 halachos, 30 laws, with respect to the laws of the Sukkah. And in response to 12 of those legal questions, 12 of those laws, he said to them, I heard an answer from my teachers, and he related what he heard. But in response to the other 18 questions, he said to them, I did not hear an answer about those questions from my own teachers, and so I will not issue a halachic ruling, a legal ruling. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says it was actually the reverse of these numbers. In response to 18, he said to them, I heard an answer from my teachers and gave it. And in response to the other 12 questions, he said to them, I did not hear an answer from my teachers, and so he did not answer the question. They said to him, are all the matters that you know only from what you heard? Don't you say any matters on your own? Haven't you developed your own legal rulings from your own enormous intellect? Rabbi Eliezer was a true Torah giant. And he said to them, well, now you force me to say a matter that I did not hear from my teachers, as I must describe my character traits and the manner in which I conduct myself. In all my days, says Rabbi Eliezer, no person ever preceded me into the study hall, as I am always the first to arrive. And I never slept in the study hall, neither a substantial sleep nor even a brief nap. And I never left anyone in the study hall and exited, as I was always the last to leave. And I never engaged in idle conversation in the study hall. Rather, I discussed only necessary matters or matters of Torah. And I never said anything that I did not hear from my teacher. And that is why he did not answer those questions that his teacher did not address. Now, apropos the character traits of Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara cites the character traits of his teacher. And who was Rabbi Eliezer's teacher? The great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Right? It was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who, at the time that the Second Temple was destroyed, he kind of negotiated with the Roman general who was there, and he said, give me Yavne and its sages, meaning, let me take the Torah scholars out of Jerusalem before you destroy it, and let us establish a center of Torah learning and education outside of Jerusalem so that the Torah tradition, so that the oral tradition can continue. And that was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he really saved Judaism. It could have ended with the fall of the Second Temple, but it did not. And he had 5 primary students, and one of them was Rabbi Eliezer. Now, in all his days, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai never engaged in idle conversation. Not just in the study hall, he never engaged in idle conversation. And he never walked 4 cubits without engaging in Torah study, and without wearing his tefillin. And no person ever preceded him into the study hall, and he never slept in the study hall, neither substantial sleep nor a brief nap. And he never contemplated matters of Torah in alleyways filthy with human excrement, as doing so is a display of contempt for the Torah. And he never left anyone in the study hall and exited, and no person ever found him sitting and silent, i.e. inactive. Rather, He was always sitting and studying, and only he opened the door for his students, disregarding his own eminent standing. And he never said anything that he did not hear from his teacher, and he never said to his students that the time has arrived to arise and leave the study hall, except on the eve of Passover, when they're obligated to sacrifice the Paschal lamb, and on the eve of Yom Kippur, when there is a commandment to eat and drink abundantly. We've learned that as much as it is a merit to us to fast on Yom Kippur, it is equally a merit to eat on the day before Yom Kippur to prepare for that fast. And so those are the only times that he said, all right, it's time to leave the study hall. Other than that, he was always the first to come, the last to leave, and he wasted no time. He filled all the moments of his day with the work of heaven, namely learning and teaching Torah. This was truly a great sage, and Rabbi Eliezer followed in the footsteps of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The Gemara continues to praise the sages. The sages taught. Hillel the elder had 80 students, right? So Hillel and Shammai that we've talked about, they were the last of the pairs in the oral tradition that began at Moses at Mount Sinai. Moses taught it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the judges to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. And then there was the last of the men of the great assembly, and then there was a series of pairs of actual like rabbis, the way we would think of them as rabbis, and Hillel and Shammai were the last of them, and they each established a school. And then we've talked about some of the disagreements between Beis Hillel, the house of Hillel, and the house of Shammai. So with respect to Hillel himself, Hillel the elder, Hillel had 80 students. 30 of them were sufficiently worthy as Torah scholars that the divine presence should rest upon them as it did upon Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. And 30 of Hillel's students were sufficiently worthy that the sun should stand still for them, as it did for Joshua, right? So the assistant of Moses, who then became the leader of the Jewish people himself. And the other 20 were on an intermediate level between the other two groups. And the greatest of all the students of Hillel was Yochanan ben Uziel, and the youngest of them was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? So the youngest of those students was the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and you can only imagine if he was just thought of as the youngest one, how great all those other 79 were, who were distinguished, and particularly this Yochanan ben Uziel, who was the greatest of Hillel's students. And all those who learned Torah directly from Hillel were learning at such an exalted level that, maybe this is being a little bit, histrionic for effect, or maybe we're supposed to take it literally, that the Shekhinah, the divine presence of the Lord, in other words, a visible manifestation of God's presence and God's attention, would rest on somebody. Right, so like Moses, we read in the Torah that he would have face-to-face conversations with God, whatever that means. But after he had been in conversation with God, he would come out and he would literally be transformed. Like his face was radiant, like Moses' face literally glowed. And in fact, he would actually put on like a mask, just so that it wouldn't be disconcerting to the people around him, because his face glowed, like it would like light up the darkness. And here we're learning that the students of Hillel were learning at such an exalted level that they had the divine presence rest on them, like Moses had the divine presence rest on him. I mean, it's really some kind of an incredible testament to the manner that Hillel could learn and teach and activate lessons in Torah. It wasn't just words passing between people. It was like he would get you there, he would get you there. To this divine and spiritual place. And the Gemara relates, the sages said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that he did not neglect Bible, Mishna, Gemara, halachos, laws, and agadot, the more story-oriented tales from the Talmud, nor did he neglect minutiae of the Torah and minutiae of the scribes, meaning the hermeneutical principles of the Torah with regard to a kal vachomer inference. If the law is such and such in this important case, then how much more would the law be the same in a kind of lesser included case? That kind of reasoning. As well as verbal analogies, the calculation of the calendar and its seasons, gematria, meaning the numerology of the Hebrew language, since every letter also has a numerical value. When you find two words that add up to the same numerical value, there are links between those words. All this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai studied deeply. In addition, he did not neglect, meaning he delved deeply into esoteric matters, right? Mysticism. He was a great adept of mystical Judaism. And these mystical esoteric matters included the conversation of the ministering angels, the conversation of demons, and the conversation of palm trees. The parables of launderers, which are folk tales that can be used to explain the Torah, the parables of foxes, and more generally, a great matter and a small matter. And the Gemara elaborates what is a great matter and a small matter. A great matter is referring to the secrets of the Maasei Merkava. The Maasei is like the work, the creation, something that a craftsman created. Right, so the craftsmanship, something created. And what is the Merkava? That's a chariot. When we talk about the Maasei Merkava, we're talking about Second Temple mysticism or Talmudic mysticism, Mishnaic mysticism. Later Jewish mysticism is rooted in the Zohar, and eventually the teachings of the holy Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who taught in the 1500s in Sfat. But when we're talking about early Jewish mysticism, from the late Second Temple period, then that's called Maasei Merkava, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as well as it'll come to me in a moment, the Rashbi. Shimon Bar Yochai, Shimon Bar Yochai is credited with authoring the Zohar, though the Zohar didn't take its final form till later. But particularly these two sages, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, were the early masters of Jewish mysticism, and that early Jewish mysticism from this period is known as Maasei Merkava, the design of the divine chariot. And this explores the conduct of the transcendent universe. That's what a great matter is that Yochanan ben Zakkai learned. What was a small matter? He was expert both in a great matter and a small matter. So a great matter was Maasei Merkava. A small matter is, for example, the laws that were ultimately formulated in the framework of the disputes of Abaye and Rava. Right, Abaye and Rava were much later. They were sages of the Gemara. They were later than the sages of the Mishna. But the way that they were working out what is the law based on the teachings of earlier sages, the principles that they would use to work out those legal rulings, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was already establishing that kind of legal reasoning. He did not neglect any of these disciplines so as to fulfill that which is stated, that from Proverbs 8:21, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance, and that I may fill their treasuries. As Rabbi Yochanan was filled with the disciplines of Torah and wisdom. And if the youngest of them, he was the youngest of Hillel's students, if the youngest of them was so prolific, well, then the greatest of them was all the more so prolific. And the Gemara relates that the sages said of Yonasan ben Uziel, the greatest of Hillel's students, that when he sat and was engaged in Torah study, the sanctity that he generated was so intense that any bird that flew over him was immediately incinerated. not that we, love the fact that birds were incinerated. Who knows how often that actually happened. But the idea is that the Torah study among these teachers and students was so intense that it was like literally heat and light, laser hot, rose off them when they were learning this Torah. And it's funny because there are these solar plants, a new kind of solar plant that is replacing photovoltaic, the kind of solar cells we're used to. These are huge plants with thousands and thousands of mirrors that are all computer controlled, and they focus the light of the sun on these plasma towers in the middle of this array of mirrors. And so these 50-story towers have such a tremendous heat. It almost looks like there's a little star perched over the field of mirrors. And it's wonderful because this is a kind of solar power that is very efficient. That heat gets stored at night so they can continue to power hundreds of thousands of homes by night. It's called a thermal battery. But the cost of that, so we're getting past gasoline, past coal. It's absolutely clean energy. It's beautiful. The only issue is that birds who fly over those towers literally get incinerated in the air. So this is actually something that we never really saw until the 21st century, but now it happens. And that is how they were describing when Yochanan ben Uziel was teaching that heat would rise and birds needed to avoid that tower of heat. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8. Mishnah number 9. In the case of one whose head and most of his body were in the sukkah, and his table was in the house, Beis Shammai deem it unfit, and Beis Hillel deem it fit. We have encountered this Mishnah before. This is actually quoted in Tractate Eruvin. This is the great teaching about why does the law generally follow the students of Hillel, Beis Hillel, over Beis Shammai, because the students of Beis Hillel would state the opinions of their adversaries before their own, right? They would state the opinions of their adversaries, and they would even state their views before their own views. And this is the example that is given of that, right? Because in this case, so the question that's being asked is, if a sukkah is very small, for some reason you're using a tiny sukkah, right? The minimum size sukkah is 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths, very small sukkah. So what has to fit in the sukkah so that you fulfill your obligation? Your head has to be inside, most of your upper body, and your table so that you can eat in the sukkah. That's what you need to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. So in the case of one whose head and most of his body were in the sukkah, but his table is not in the sukkah, his table is in the house, it extends outside the sukkah. This is a sukkah attached to the house, so the table is actually in the house, not in the sukkah. So Beis Shammai say that sukkah is not fit. You do not fulfill your obligation in that sukkah. And Beis Hillel deem it fit. Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, and wasn't there an incident where the elders of Beis Shammai, see, this is Beis Hillel talking, and in telling this story, which involved the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel, they mention the elders of Beis Shammai before their own elders. And wasn't there an incident, say Beis Hillel, where the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel went to visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Chachoranit, and they found him such that he was sitting with his head and most of his body in the sukkah and his table in the house, and they didn't say anything to him. So even Beis Shammai did not object. Beis Shammai replied to Beis Hillel, is that a proof that you're bringing? That's no proof. That is not even what happened. Rather, the elders of Beis Shammai said to him, if you are accustomed to act in this manner, you have never fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah in your whole life. And by the way, with respect to this halacha, what do you need in order to fulfill your obligation? It has to be your head, your upper body, and your table, according to the opinion of Beis Shammai. This is one of those few cases where the law follows Beis Shammai. The Mishnah continues, Women, slaves, and minors are exempt from the mitzvah of Sukkah. They are exempt from this time-bound positive commandment. A minor who does not need his mother any longer is obligated in the mitzvah. Clearly a minor that's a male, because women are not obligated at any age. So a minor who does not need his mother any longer is obligated in the mitzvah of Sukkah. And there was an incident where the daughter-in-law of Shammai, the elder, gave birth just before Sukkot, and Shammai removed the coat of plaster from the roof, leaving the beams, and roofed with beams over the bed for the newborn minor. Right? His daughter is not obligated in Sukkah, so why is he doing this? Turning her bedroom into a Sukkah? For the purposes of the newborn. But didn't we learn that a minor is only obligated in Sukkah once he no longer needs his mother? Clearly a newborn needs his mother. But that is, Shammai did not win that legal battle. Right? So that's according to the view of Shammai, not the majority. Now we go to the Gemara. We skip a little bit. And the Gemara asks, which of them... Okay, so there was a discussion that we're skipping because we're a little bit short on time. And they're discussing how do they derive that women are not obligated in Sukkah, right? So you might have thought that, well, even though we know women are not obligated in positive commandments, thou shalt do such and such, as opposed to negative commandments, thou shalt not do such and such. Negative commandments apply to everybody. It's only positive commandments, which must be performed at a specific time, that women are excused from performing. Now, we might have thought that just as women are obligated to eat matzah on the first night of Passover, that they would be obligated to dwell in the sukkah during Sukkot. And so they kind of start looking at some verses which are which substantiate the ruling that women are not obligated, and they're comparing to Yom Kippur, because women are obligated to fast on Yom Kippur, which is a time-bound positive commandment. I guess it is not a negative commandment. Thou shalt not eat. That's not the commandment. The commandment is you shall afflict yourselves. Afflicting yourself is fasting, and women are commanded in that. So why are they not obligated in Sukkah? So they say, which of these rulings about Yom Kippur versus Sukkot is derived from the verse, and which is a law transmitted to Moses at Mount Sinai and merely supported by a verse? And furthermore, why do I need the verse? And why do I need the law? Isn't a sukkah a positive time-bound mitzvah? And the principle is that women are exempt from all positive time-bound commandments. There's no need for a special derivation to exempt women from the mitzvah of sukkah. And there is no need for a derivation with regard to their obligation to fast on Yom Kippur, as that can be derived from that teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that Rav said, that Rabbi Yehuda said, that Rav said, what is it? Derived from that which Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said. As Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said, and it was likewise taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael. The verse at Numbers 5:6 says, when a man or woman shall commit any sin that a person commits to commit a trespass against the Lord, that soul shall be guilty. And the verse equated a woman to a man with regard to all punishments and prohibitions, right? Prohibitions. Generally speaking, when you neglect to fulfill a positive commandment, there's not a punishment associated with it. Certainly not as strong a punishment. The correction for not doing a positive commandment is to do the positive commandment when you next get the opportunity. But for violating negative commandments, for violating a prohibition, right? You shall not, bow down to false gods. You shall not create idols. You shall not do work on Shabbos, etc. If you violate those prohibitions, there a woman and a man stand equally guilty before the Lord for violating those prohibitions. And the commandments of Yom Kippur include prohibitions, as well as the punishment of Karas. Why then was this additional derivation necessary? And Abaye, why do we need to derive that women are obligated to fast on Yom Kippur? It should be obvious. Nevertheless, it was necessary that a woman is exempt from the mitzvah of Sukkah, as it might enter your mind to say At Leviticus 23:42, shall you reside, which indicates that you reside in the sukkah in the same manner as you dwell. Just as dwelling is typically performed by a man and his wife, they dwell in their house, so too the mitzvah of sukkah might be performed by both a man and his wife, and therefore it teaches us that women are exempt, right? So even though there's a general principle that women are exempt from time-bound positive commandments, we have a specific teaching from Moses at Mount Sinai that women are exempt from sukkah. We skip down a bit, and the Mishnah continues. A minor who does not need his mother any longer, and I'm almost done, so if you got questions or comments, get them in. A minor who does not need his mother any longer is obligated in the mitzvah of Sukkah. So it's not just that a boy becomes obligated when he becomes an adult, when he has his bar mitzvah at 13. He's actually going to be obligated earlier than that, as soon as he's no longer needy of his mom, right? He can get along without his mom. So how do we define that? What are the circumstances of a minor who does not need his mother? In the school of Rabbi Yanai, they said, this is referring to any child who defecates and his mother does not need to wipe him. A boy who can go to the bathroom number 2 by himself does not need his mother. Rabbi Shimon says, it is any child who awakens from his sleep and he does not call, Mom, Mom. The Gemara asks, well, older children also call for their mother when they arise. What then is the criterion? And the Gemara answers, rather, say that any child who awakens and does not call mother, mother repeatedly until his mother comes is characterized as one who does not need his mother. An older child will cry once. However, if his mother does not come, he will tend to himself. So we're not saying that a child doesn't need his mother. I mean, a child of any age, even an adult in their 50s or 60s who's blessed that his parents are still alive, needs his parents. But when we're talking about a child that is of an age to start observing the mitzvah of Sukkah for himself, it's just a child that can wake up in the middle of the night, call for his mother, and if his mother doesn't come, he'll be able to calm himself down and not go nuts. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9. Now I'm just going to read Mishnah number 10. And this is a very well-known Mishnah. And then we'll stop there for today. So Mishnah number 10. All 7 days of Sukkot, a person renders his Sukkah his permanent residence and his house his temporary residence. If rain fell, from when is it permitted to vacate the Sukkah? It is permitted from the point that it is raining so hard that the congealed dish will spoil. And the sages told a parable. To what is this matter comparable? Meaning, what is it comparable to? What does it mean when it rains on Sukkot? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Now, during the prayers, during the week of Sukkot, we actually pray for rain, right? There's a big prayer that we say on Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day of Sukkot, and there's some other matters around that time where we pray that we'll have ample rainfall in the season that is coming. What if it actually rains during Sukkot? To what is this matter comparable? It is comparable to a servant who comes to pour wine for his master. He pours a jug of water in his face to show him that his presence is not desired. So too in the Sukkah, rain is an indication that the Holy One, blessed be He, does not want the person to fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkah. You're excused, right? If it rains, because we're closer to God when we're in the Sukkah in the sense that we're surrounded by a mitzvah, so we have a great proximity to God. If it starts raining, that is a sign that, okay, you don't need to be doing this mitzvah right now. You can go back into your regular house. I like the way Rav Steinsaltz puts that. Some people will say that if it rains during Sukkot, it means that God is unhappy with us. Rav Steinsaltz simply says if it rains during Sukkot, it means you're excused from being in the Sukkah. God doesn't need your immediate presence, as it were, right at that moment. There we go. That's where we're going to finish. I'm going to look at some comments or questions now, but recall I'm going to be away for the next week. I'm hoping to be back a week from Friday the 13th for the regular noontime show. We're actually going to have some family visiting us here in LA at that time. So just in case it's not possible, I'll announce, I'll let you know. In which case Saturday night may be difficult too. But as far as I can tell, by the following Sunday, August 15th, by then, unless something really weird happens, we would be back to normal. But I'm hoping that we'll get class going again on Friday, 13th. Okay, let me see if there's comments or questions. Steve, in the notes on Shammai the Elder, it says he was either an architect or builder because he was often depicted with a builder's cubit or measuring stick. I never envisaged him other than a full-time Torah scholar. Was it common for these Torah scholars to have a day job? Yes, it was. Once they were the head of an academy, often they would just do that full-time. And so Shammai probably at least eventually became that. But, for instance, Rabbi Tarfon, we read about him, he was a great landholder, and I think he was a beer brewer. In fact, there were several sages who, were beer kings. Like they brewed beer. They made beer, date beer, not wheat beer. But a lot of sages had professions, yes. And in fact, not all sages. Some sages said, you should just toil in Torah and be as poor as you need to be so that you can do Torah all the time. Others said you should have a livelihood so that you're not worried about your livelihood. And then when you're studying Torah, your focus and concentration can be complete because you're not stressed out about money. So there were different, sages in the way they approached this, but there were lots of sages who had professions, no doubt. Yosef, women are still welcome to join in the Sukkah, right? Yes, they are. Absolutely. And not only that, even though women are not obligated in Sukkah, we discussed this a few weeks ago, there's an actual interesting difference between Jewish women in the Ashkenaz tradition, Northern Europe, versus women in the Sephardic tradition, Southern Europe. So Ashkenazi women will take their meals in the Sukkah, and when they do that, they'll say the blessing, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to dwell in the Sukkah." How can they say that? Even though they themselves are not commanded, women are not obligated to dwell in the Sukkah, but they can say the bracha because they're one of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are commanded. On the other hand, in Sephardic tradition, women take their meals in the Sukkah, but they don't say the blessing, and that's according to Rambam, according to Maimonides, that since they're not obligated in the commandment of Sukkah, they don't say the blessing when they do it. But all Jewish women take their meals in the Sukkah during Sukkot, even if they're not obligated to. It is certainly praiseworthy to do so. And Janice, thanks for this class, Sal and Nina. Safe travels, Sal, and best of luck on your golfing adventure. Rooting for you. Take a slow backswing. Great advice, Janice. Thank you. I will remember that. It's great to be with you all. Keep learning. While I'm away, I'll try to just post some ideas from time to time in written form about what we're reading. And then I look forward to being with you again, hopefully as a member of Team USA, going to the Maccabee Games in 2022. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers, and have a great evening.